A slip of the tongue may mean the difference between victory and defeat.
With a quick mind and a ready smile. How to lose friends and infuriate people, all in one easy lesson.
Made possible only through years of research.
If you are to impress them, you must interest them.
Truth.
And soul!
Truth and Soul Incorporated, the New Zealand advertising podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Truth and Soul Incorporated podcast, also modestly known as the New Zealand Advertising Podcast, just in case you thought you'd stumbled across some weird religious sect. My name is Paul Katmer, and all this came about because not only have I worked across the New Zealand advertising industry for the last 20 years, mainly as some form of creative, but I also love podcasts. That's what happens when you have dogs instead of children. Now, while other countries have some fine advertising podcasts, there wasn't really much covering the ad industry in God's Zone. I mentioned this to Jim Hall, who's too deaf to listen to podcasts himself, but he mentioned it to Jonathan of Franklin Road, who for reasons best known to himself thought it was a bloody good idea. We shall see. So, Jonathan has been installed in the Peter Grant management role, while my position is to sit on the chair, argue and spill coffee on whoever is on the other chair. Shane and Cole of Franklin Road do the engineering, editing and weird sounds, while Otis Frizzell kindly did the logo. Jonathan put the opening theme together and assures me that the samples he used are all legit. That'll be a first. All of this to give the impression that we're less amateurish than we really are. Although this podcast is generally about the creative side of advertising, we've expanded it to include on occasion suits, clients, directors, music composers, bartenders and general hangers-on. The idea is that the podcast serves as an oral history of New Zealand advertising. It provides tips for any young people foolish enough to want to find a way in the industry, and hopefully it's more interesting to listen to on your commute than the loser sitting next to you on the bus. Being modern, we have a website, so Google truthandsoul.co.nz for more details. For contact details, you also see some links to the work that we talk about. We are, of course, open to sponsorship offers. A case of beer should do the trick. Jeff Ross of Moa, if you're listening. So subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And also emails are welcome, i.e. if you liked a particular podcast or have someone you'd like to hear from, let us know. If you hate it and think it's a stupid idea, then there's really no need to let me know. Just don't listen and go back to the dark web where you can hate in peace with your brothers.
You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give to be the truth?
And soul!
Okay, so for the first podcast from Truth and Soul Incorporated, we managed to cajole a fantastic guest and a very unusual New Zealand creative leader. I say unusual because he's not actually a POM, he is of course South African. Damon Stapleton of DDB has been part of some marvellous award-winning work across three powerhouses of Southern Hemisphere rugby: South Africa, Australia, and, of course, more importantly, New Zealand. Among other things, we talk about how he got out of Tits and Balloons, his term, how he got his work into London's Design Museum without being either a designer, a Londoner, or a stuffed animal, and who he thinks will win the Rugby World Cup. By the way, here at Truth and Soul Incorporated, we like to have our corrections before we even make our mistakes. So when I mention a creative director called Shane Brannigan, I do, of course, mean Shane Bradnick. It's just curious that Damon agreed with me with the wrong name. Anyway, have a listen.
You're listening to Truth
And Soul,
the New Zealand Advertising Podcast.
So, Damon,
Yep.
I thought, following the tradition of advertising podcasts, the best way in is if you could give us some background as to how you ended up in the industry.
Yeah. I grew up in South Africa.
Whereabouts?
Well, I went to about 16 schools. My dad was actually was a rock star. And so he was in a band called The Strangers in the 60s.
Okay, if you could see Damon now, unfortunately you can't do it on a podcast, he is kind of dressed like he was in a rock band in the 60s.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe the bassist.
Yeah, definitely on the front man. But and then he did all sorts of things in the 60s, and he he started working in hotels. He worked for a man called Sol Kerzner, who's sort of...
I know the name.
He's sort of like the African version of Donald Trump.
Yeah, he did Sun City, was it?
Yeah, that's right. And he had sort of stuff in Dubai, but we moved around a lot because my dad ran hotels. So didn't really live in a house till I was about 16 or 17. We were always living in hotels. But I finished school in Durban, which is in Natal.
Yeah, I've been there. Hot, wet,
kind of like Brisbane without money.
Yeah.
And I actually started off. I studied photography, and that's what I was originally. I studied photography. I did that for a while. Assisted various photographers, worked for Reuters, freelance, did all sorts of things like that.
So you're reasonably successful?
I managed to pay the rent. I think, when you're young and you're trying to be a photographer, and especially in those days where, equipment was expensive, I was always scrambling. But, I did a few good things, and I shot for a lot of magazines, assisted some pretty big photographers. So, it teaches you how to see.
Yeah.
And I think, photography is useful in lots of ways. I also went to film school for a while. I think I did a lot of things for a while in my 20s.
Yeah.
As a creative in those days, there wasn't really, especially in South Africa, there wasn't really a clear path like, oh, this is what you can do.
Well, was there an element of doing those things because you wanted to be cool?
No, I just knew I wasn't an accountant.
Yeah.
And so I knew that creativity is something I liked, but it's a strange thing trying to make a living in the beginning out of being a creative, because I think creative is more of a broader way of looking at the world. And you almost have to find a way to channel that into something that has value to other people.
Well, that you can get paid for.
Yeah.
In London, traditionally, say starting back in the 60s, art directors were all painters who wanted to get some money, or maybe photographers.
Yeah.
And the copywriters were all failed novelists, some of whom went on to become very successful novelists, like Salman Rushdie. I think Joseph Heller might have been in advertising an agency too. There's quite a few of them.
I wanted to ask you, in London, like creatives tend to come from the north. Is that true? Or was it true?
They're called. It's kind of southern wankers and northern monkeys is the way. What's broken down a bit? There'll be a bit of disruption now as Damon's taking his leather jacket off.
Sorry,
it's quite warm in here.
I'm getting undressed.
Yeah, we don't have the air conditioning on because of the hum. Yeah, the advertising was kind of like boxing for, if I'm allowed to say it, for the ghetto. And if you were poor in the States, boxing was a way out. And advertising creatives were generally working class. Generally working class. There's a few posh writers, but the art directors were guys who didn't go to university. Some made their way to art school. And they worked up, and they could get paid large amounts of money, because relatively for the times, because it wasn't a career path. If you were the offspring of a well-to-do family, they went, well, do you want to go into the army, or what about banking, or running a hotel, whatever? No one went, oh, do you want to sit in a dark room and think up daft ideas for advertising?
Yeah, I did a bit of amateur boxing in my teens, and there are very few wealthy boxers.
Yes.
I've always thought with advertising and creatives, it's kind of because you have to do it, or there's an element of that, because it's not an easy road.
You wanted an outlet for...
Yeah, I tried a lot of things, and photography, directing. I think also what I liked about advertising was the variety.
Yes.
And the ability to do all sorts of different things in different ways. And, it is sort of a home of misfits.
Yes.
So you start to find out maybe you're not as strange as you thought. There are other strange people.
He is just that as strange as you think, people. But yeah. Although these days there's a relative homogeneity about creative departments.
Yeah, I think it's a problem. I've actually been trying to do something about it. Is there's sort of when I started, you'd have a CD, you would hire a waitress, or there'd be all sorts of strange people in creative departments, and I think it has become a much more homogenized way that people get into advertising. And I think hiring people maybe they're a bit older, or looking at different ways of creating creative departments, because we all talk about diversity, but how you actually hire, I think becomes a really interesting question going forward, because otherwise you will have very similar creative departments, I think.
Yes, it is. One of the difficulties is that there are, if you look to hire a senior female creative in New Zealand, they're in relative short supply, and of course that all stems from the beginning. I don't know what the rates are at the colleges. If they're 50-50, I would imagine they maybe are. So what happens to all those girls?
I think there's also a thing where people work here for a couple of years and obviously go overseas. Yeah. And so that for me, there's always sort of maybe a slight weakness in the middle. What you'd call your middleweight copywriter or art director is. Yeah. I think there's an abundance of juniors, and then seniors eventually come back from overseas. Yeah. But in the middle, there's maybe not as much talent. Yeah.
Yeah, that was always my issue, so that's why I had to go and start my own agency, because it's always going to catch up with you in the end. Okay, back to Durban.
Yeah, okay.
So, 1920.
Yeah, 1864. So I went and I did a whole lot of things, and eventually fell into advertising in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
And I eventually worked for a man called John Hunt.
Yep.
And John Hunt has an agency there called TBWA Hunt Lascaris.
Yeah. And originally, I presume it was Hunt Lascaris.
Well, I actually started an agency called TBWA Gavin Reddy, which was a through the line agency, I think they were called in those days.
Which is now just an agency.
And they were unkindly called Tits and Balloon agencies.
Tits and Balloons?
That's what they were called, because they did promos and activations.
Yeah.
So I think we've come a long way.
Yeah.
But that was sort of where I started. So I started in retail, I started in promo and activations, and they were very, very unfashionable in those days. Like, they were not seen as the place to be. But I think it gave me a very good grounding of all sorts of different types of advertising.
Yeah.
And then I moved across to Hunt Lascaris.
Was it hard to make that leap?
Well, what happened was, it merged. And it actually merged, and about 3 months after I had got to Hunt Lascaris, almost none of the people that came across were still there. Because Hunt Lascaris in those days, and I would imagine every agency has, or every country, has, like your AMV, or there's a sort of an iconic agency, I think, that everyone passes through. And I think Hunt Lascaris, even today, is still in South Africa sort of seen that way. It's sort of the school that you will go to. But it was almost like another planet compared to any other agency at the time. The things that they were working on and the work they were doing, and John Hunt being a global creative director, it was a very...
he was global creative director then?
Yeah, I think when I got there, he was already global creative director.
So what year was that?
That was probably about 2005, 2006.
Right, okay.
And so people that had, preceded me, there were people like Tony Granger, you had people like Matthew Bull. There's, you can go and sort of all the way through. Johannes Leonardo, Jan Jacobs worked there. So there's a real sort of alumni of people that have gone through there. But when I got there, it was in pretty bad shape. They'd lost some big clients. And I think it had gone from maybe 25 teams to 5, which was, it was pretty catastrophic. And then over the next couple of years, I think I was made ECD when I was 32, which I think is probably about 5 years too young.
How long had you been there? When
I had been there literally about A year.
And you come from the Tits and Balloons agency.
It had been and I mean, I never called it that, just to be clear.
No.
For anyone
I'm just repeating what Damon said, to be clear.
But that's that was the unkindness.
Yes,
But it was a very successful agency, Gavin Reddy. It was a very successful agency, and I mean, I have a lot of affection for it because there was a real camaraderie. The people that worked there, and I think part of the merging was to bring us across because maybe the world was changing a little bit. So sort of, napalm, agency in Meltdown. They give me the gun and the sheriff's badge and go, off you go. And
so John Hunt called you into his office and went, okay, Damon, you take over.
Yeah, I think John at that time, I'm trying to remember this, John was still away. He had either just come back from New York or was still in New York. But pretty much that was the deal. It's like, here, we think you can do it. And I would say for the first year of me being there, I really didn't know what I was doing.
Because nobody, I think other creative directors, when I say creative directors, I mean ECDs or CCOs, not group heads. Nobody teaches you what to do.
No.
They go, right, okay, you're creative director, and all you know about is what the person before you has done, which can end quite disastrously.
Yeah, the VAL movement, that is the titles that we all give ourselves and have created over we're creative directors, you call it whatever you want. But I think the problem is when you say go from a midweight to a CD or to a senior to CD to your job role changes a lot.
Yes.
But because it just has creative in the title, people have this feeling that there's a consistency to what you're doing. The biggest learning for me was, I'm 32 years old and I'm talking to CEOs that are 50 years old. I'm worrying about my PlayStation and they're worrying about their prostate. These are very different realities. So when you're 32 years old and you're trying to have these conversations, that's a very difficult skill to learn.
Yes.
When you're sitting in a boardroom with, the head of a bank, and he's looking at you like, my son's older than this guy. Kind of, that was a steep learning curve for me.
And you always had long hair?
I've always looked like vaguely homeless.
Yeah. Not vaguely.
I call it what's a derelict. But I think what I realized is you've got to lean into what you are, and I think that's one of the great learnings as a creative director. Is all your faults will be shown to you every day. Whatever you're bad at, it'll be served up to you every day. And I always say to my creative directors, you're going to make 10 decisions. On a good day, you'll get 7 right.
Yeah. And
you've got to be comfortable with that. That took me a long time because I think when you start, you think there's a plan or there's a sort of it's all going to work out. It's all been figured out. And I think it's really about learning how to deal with what's happening in front of you. That was a big learning for me.
It is. I think being one of the jobs of being a creative director is being an umpire.
Yeah. Being
an umpire of creative work. The teams, and you have to go out, not out, leg before, whatever. Sometimes you're right. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're wrong.
Yeah, and I've been wrong many times.
Yeah.
I think, we are in a business of opinions, often masquerading as science.
Yeah.
And I think one of the great things I've had to learn is, and it's funny, I think there's a little bit of self-loathing that advertising has at the moment, where we're into woke washing and purpose and all of these things.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to sell. And it's one of the things that I think very few creatives are taught these days is how to sell an idea.
Yeah, they're not. And I think the ability to sell that was prevalent in agencies back in the 60s and 70s. That was a key role as an account man. Mm-hmm. And in, dare I say it, in the better agencies, it was you had a great strong creative director, it was a job of the suits of the account men to find a way to get those ads sold and to get a budget to get it made, and that was how great work happened. That became very difficult to do for a number of reasons, and scams appeared.
And And I mean, it's funny. I've just come from a talk now from Peter Field.
Yeah.
So Les Benet and Peter Field, and his whole talk was about how creativity used to be, in about 2008, was 12 times a multiplier.
Yeah.
In terms of return on investment, and he reckons it's now 0 if you look at canned work. And
Right.
what he's saying is the work that's been rewarded is all short term.
Yes.
And so I had a conversation with him, and I said, I think a lot of that's to do with the fact that if you look at budgets, if you look at an integrated campaign from, say, 2005, it was radio, TV, and print.
Yeah.
You now have this proliferation of channels.
Yeah.
So you kind of start to make work that's a bit like a Swiss Army knife. Because the work he was showing, if you think about Cadbury Gorilla or something like that, it's fairly bespoke. It's work for a specific channel.
It's a great TV ad. There's nothing else.
And that's what it is.
Yeah.
Now, what I think you're doing is you're often trying to make work that fits across multiple channels. And is that a good thing to do? It's an interesting question. But his view is the work that has been rewarded these days is not work that is building brands. It's work that's very short term.
Yes, I agree with that. And as well as the proliferation of media, there's also the short-termism of companies, where you have quarterly reporting, where
it's driven by, you got to make the numbers.
Yeah.
And it's a real interesting question. And I mean, he's pretty angry about it because he's saying what we're doing is we spent years and years building this case for creativity. But then we might be shooting ourselves in the foot going forward by making or saying this is the right kind of work to be making. So it's an interesting debate.
Yeah, I think the industry is in a state of flux, is in an interregnum, and it will take a while to sort itself out. It's a very colluded area at the moment.
Do you think it's because it's so blurred?
Yeah,
everybody's doing everything.
Well, what happened? Digital came along, and digital came along a lot slower than was anticipated because. You were creative director in the mid-noughties. In 99, I think,
that's when it's sort of...
The Titanium came
that's
around.
Right, that's right.
It was around
Dan Wyden.
the BMW films.
Yeah,
it was, well, it's not run on television, therefore it can't win can't be entered into
2001. I think that came out. You're right.
Yeah, and that was that was the death of television. Televisions, and it has declined hugely, I believe, but it's still around and kicking, and we haven't quite worked out as an industry how to use the internet properly.
Yeah, it's a real interesting question. Targeted personalization versus mass. And if you look at it, Ehrenberg, Bass, and all of those guys, they say mass.
Yeah.
But if you look at what a lot of people in the digital world say is the opposite. And I would imagine right now, if you're a marketing director, you must be getting so many conflicting messages as to what you should do. It must be very confusing.
Yes. Yeah. In the 60s, 70s, mass media.
That's boom.
Do a great TV ad and your sales will fly.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
And now it's a lot more confusing. Let me try and... I'll put that's the air conditioning there, folks.
I'm actually okay.
Okay,
You've got 2 layers.
2 layers and a few beers and some red wine last night. So. Okay, so back to TBWA Hunt Lascaris.
So that was my, I'd say that was my grounding. That was my formative years. I worked with some great people. And I worked my way up. And I was ECD there for 6 years.
Yeah.
And we ended up being agency of the decade. We got back to number 1, which for me was something I was always pretty proud of because we were really not in good shape when I took over.
Yeah.
And that's when you start to learn what it means to build something. It's not just about doing a good piece of work, but it's about building something. So,
and you learn you learn more from failure
Yeah, and I mean, it's a hard thing. For me, I think the thing about being a creative is on some level, if you're about emotion, you have to be vulnerable. Like, I think it's very hard to be a complete hard ass as a creative and write things that move people. And I think it's an interesting thing to be able to develop a thick skin but keep a soft heart. I think that's a really interesting path you have to go as a creative director.
Yeah. I don't know what my reputation is, but your reputation is terrible. Nice. It's as a
I saw the film of you popping my face.
I can't remember that campaign.
Yeah.
But as a decent bloke, a decent person, and that has not always been the way with other creative directors. Won't name any names, and I'm not necessarily thinking of people in New Zealand, but certainly ones I've met around the world.
I've worked with some of them. Yeah. One of my first CDs used to set my layouts on fire with a Zippo lighter.
Yeah.
And call me all sorts of interesting things, and tell me I was useless. And I suppose it comes down to your philosophy. There's, on the one hand, you have standards. What are your standards? How pragmatic are you? Because there'll be situations where the path isn't really clear.
Yeah.
But, I wrote this blog once, which was called Trying to Find Jesus Through Advertising. And it was all about the fact that sometimes people imbue advertising with very magical powers as to how it can clear up your skin and, your life will work out. And it almost becomes a substitute for your life sometimes.
Well, at the career?
Yeah. And I feel as I've got older, and I was like that, but make no mistake, when I started, I was pretty obsessed with advertising.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with ideas, but I like to keep some humanity or decency when it comes to how you treat people. Because I think if you're in how you manage people, I think there was a time when I got into this business, if you were the ECD, you were almost like a rock star. You were the front man. And I can think of guys, even when I was in Australia, that were like that. I think because of the nature of campaigns now, you're a bit more like a shepherd. And you have to have relationships with multiple people, and you're going to have to see them the next day. And if you think of a big campaign now, you might have 10, 15, 20 people involved. I think that's a different energy. So I try not to take advertising too seriously. I love ideas and I love making great work, but I'm not really into cults.
No, if you go to Cannes, advertising thinks it is the most important thing in the world.
Yeah, and
there seems to be more. Okay, might need some editing here. Might need another coffee.
Well, I can tell you a story about my grandfather when I was at Cannes.
Okay, go on.
So this is here's a revealing moment about Damon.
Okay.
When I was still a young man and I'd just been made ECD, I went across to Cannes. I was with John Hunt and Lee Clow.
Yeah.
And we won exactly nothing. I think we had 3 finalists, which for Hunt Lascaris was a disaster. I mean, it wasn't great. And I remember sitting on the edge of this pier, feeling sorry for myself and going like, oh, my life's fucked and this is all terrible, this is all terrible. And I got this weird phone call from my grandfather. Now, my grandfather was a Battle of Britain fighter pilot. His name was Basil Gerald Stapleton, DFC. He never phoned me.
DFC is a distinguished flying cross for Australians.
So he got a Dutch one and an English one, which is pretty rare. But an amazing guy, completely crazy. But I think if you fought in the Battle of Britain when you were young, you'd be a little bit strange. But he was phoning me to find my dad's phone number. It's just coincidence. But he said, oh, you sound a bit down. What's going on? And I was like, I said, well, I'm in Cannes and, awards for advertising. And his first thing was, what? Awards for advertising? That's ridiculous. That was his first comment. And the second comment after me telling him and pouring my heart out was, when I was 18, I was flying Spitfires. Most of my regiment, or I think it's regiment, died. Squadron, sorry. He was a squadron leader, sorry. His squadron died. But we had a saying, which is, keep pulling the trigger till you see the fuckers smoke. And I'd never ever heard him swear. And in a single moment, I understood everything. I realized how ridiculous I felt about, what is this? It's an award show. It's okay. And I remember it's something that sort of sticks with me because I've had years where we haven't done well, and I've had years where we have done well. And it always just reminds me of, what is real and what isn't. And I think we sometimes create constructs for ourselves in advertising. And it's always good to be rewarded. And, people work bloody hard in this industry. So I've got no issue with people being celebrated. Yeah. But I think you sometimes have to have some perspective on what it means.
Yeah. You have done very well in advertising. You haven't necessarily done very well at
humanness.
Life.
Yeah. It is what it is. And I mean, there are a lot of people that I grew up with that would have a different point of view. And I think even when I was younger, I had a different point of view. And I think when you're young, if I'm going to contradict myself, there is a need to pursue a goal that I think can be useful because it drives you forward. Yes. So I think that's a good thing.
I think at any age.
Yeah.
To be honest, now I'm
maybe
60
the goal
on
changes.
Monday. My goal is currently to write a book.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that. When I've done that, if that is any good and people read it, it'll be to write another book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think maybe advertising, if I've learned any of this, the stages I've been through, and I guess maybe what happens is you go from being the rock star to the band manager. Yeah. And there's a shift, and it's maybe there's an ego part to that you have to deal with. But I think it's an important shift because I think if you stay in that space as you get older, you're writing a book because you've got experience. There's things that you've learned, the stuff you want to say. I think that's quite different to say when you're starting your career.
Yeah, no, I set out to write one when I was 29.
Yeah,
it would have been awful.
Yeah, well, I'm writing a blog because I think it's the lazy man's way to write a book.
Yeah, well, we'll come on to your blog later.
Yeah,
but we haven't really talked about any work. So when I was in London a couple of months ago over the summer, and I went to the Design Museum.
Oh yeah.
And I'm going. There was a Stanley Kubrick exhibition, which was really good. Everyone who's in advertising goes, the Stanley Kubrick exhibition. It was great. I love the type. They had the typewriter from The Shining with All Work and No Play.
Great documentary called Boxes. If you ever get a chance, it's all about going into Stanley Kubrick's house.
Yeah.
After he passes.
Yeah.
And they open in. There's just hundreds of these cardboard boxes, and each one is a project.
Yeah.
And you start to understand how obsessive he was about all of these different things. It's a great documentary.
Do you know Chris Cunningham? Director from...
I don't know.
No, it was his... he's a director from the UK, and he was working with Kubrick to make the models for the baby's head in AI. That was his job.
Wow.
That was all he was doing.
Cool.
But anyway, back to the Design Museum, which has moved, I think. It's pretty impressive building, and if you're in the creative side, there are some great museums in London, and that's one of them. So I went up to have a wander around, and there's always a slight schism between advertising and design. They both think the practitioners of the other one are wankers.
Yeah.
So I was quite not surprised that there wasn't much advertising within the design, but there was only one advertising advertisement in the whole Design Museum, and that was from Damon. That was the Zimbabwean.
Well, there was a few of us. But
yes.
I was part of it. There were five of us, and I mean, I think in your career,
I just say that guys, if you haven't if you don't know the ad that we're talking about, it was
for the Zimbabwean newspaper. Essentially, when we did this, Zimbabwe was in free fall, and its economy was, Robert Mugabe had completely stuffed the economy. And I'll tell you what happened. I got a phone call from a man called Wolf Mbangwa, and he said, look, I haven't got any money, but we've got this newspaper called the Zimbabwean, and they want to put a 30% luxury tax on it, which means, we'll go out of business, which was the point. And it's a bit like what we had to do is a bit like trying to get people in Auckland to buy the Sydney Morning Herald. We had to get people in South Africa to buy the newspaper.
Yeah.
And they didn't have a lot of money. Well, the only money they actually had was Zim dollars. And of course, Zim dollars at that point were worthless. I think there was a $100 trillion note that had just come out. I mean, just think about that for a second, how insane that is.
Well, that's happened in the Weimar.
Yeah, exactly. Same
Weimar
thing.
Republic in Germany.
You're trying to buy bread with,
I have a framed million mark note from 1930s, but
so
not trillion. Yeah, you trumped me there.
But it was just insane, and strangely there was an idea on the wall at the agency at the time, which was basically a blank piece of paper and a little square, and it said Zim dollar, and then next to it wrote, "What if we use them as flyers because they're so worthless," or something to that effect. And we thought, well, maybe the money can be the ad. And there was two teams, Raf and Shelley, they're CDs at Droga in London, and there's another team called Nick Hulley and Nadja Loscott, who are, I think, creative directors at AMV in London.
Yeah,
there's them and I, and we sat there sticking the stuff together. And it's a funny thing about work. Great ideas are just as scary as bad ideas. You have no idea, and people say they do, but they don't really, when you start these projects, that anything's going to happen. But it started off as a flyer, and where it really kind of worked was we then went, okay, what if it was a poster? And then we said, okay, what if it was wallpaper? And then we went, what if we did a billboard? And when we did the billboard, and that went up, the thing was, and you got to remember this is what, 2008, 2009. It's really the first time social media sort of could spread things, or certainly in South Africa.
Yeah.
And that made a huge difference. If you think of Dumb Ways to Die and these campaigns that have won, a lot of it is to do with the fact that people have seen the work already. And the social media wave hits Cannes almost before the people get there.
This is what part of the topic I'll be writing about in the book, which is a satire on advertising, is that if along with Here's My Dead Dog, Where's My Award?
Where's My Award? Yeah.
It's like here's my 400 million views. Where's my award?
Here's my case study.
Yeah,
yeah.
And I there is, in my mind, no doubt that Dumb Ways to Die, if it didn't have that views, or that number of views on the internet, would not have half the number of awards as good as it is.
Yeah, and I mean, it won 5 Grand Prix,
which was crazy. And the Grand Prix it didn't win was Cyber, because I was on the jury, and I don't know how much it swayed it, but I said, what? It already won 3 Grand Prix. I said, like, Cyber, we're supposed to be showing the way ahead for the industry. What is the point of giving it another Grand Prix?
Yeah, well,
sorry, John and team, but it's like I just rubber stamping it.
Well, I think you and I can do another podcast just on Cannes.
Yes, but well, we need to have that discussion because it might help with the book.
But anyway, so look, we put that out there, and I think the GFC had just happened. So sometimes planets line up, right? The GFC had happened. The world was not in a good shape. We had done this campaign about economy failing, freedom of the press, and it took off. And that was a year. I think if you're lucky, maybe 2 or 3 times in your career, you'll have a year where it all just works out.
Yeah,
and that was for me.
I'm still waiting.
Yeah, I think you've done okay, Paul.
Yeah,
and it won everything.
Yeah.
We could have thrown it out of a window, and it won won the Grand Prix at Cannes. And in those days, I think it won 6 lions, which in those days was unheard of.
Yeah.
I think in total it won 9 lions,
Yeah.
which was crazy.
Yeah.
1 black pencil at
Yeah.
DNAD, 1, yeah. So, and I'm very grateful to that piece of work because it opened a lot of doors for me. And I think when you come from the third world, which is where I come from, you think about guys in South America or, there's a lot of talk about scam, but I think there's also a lot of talk about, people trying to get out of places,
Get out of the ghetto.
get to America. So people, you talk about it being, guys from the north, like it's a bit like boxing. I think in those days it was very much like that. And I don't know if I'd be where I am today if I hadn't done that piece of work. I mean, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have.
That will open doors.
It did, and I got phone calls. I got a phone call to go work in London. I got a phone call to go work in Asia, and through a roundabout route, because of those phone calls, I also got a phone call to go to Australia.
Yeah,
and I checked them all out. Went to Charlotte Street in London. It was Saatchi and Saatchi at the time.
Yeah. Who did you see there?
Well, I ended up seeing. This is kind of a weird story, but there's a guy called David Nobby.
Yeah, I know Nobby.
And Nobby introduced me when I was judging DNAD to a man called Mike Rebello. And Mike Rebello.
I know of Mike Rebello.
So Mike Rebello runs Publicist now, I think, for Australia.
Yeah. I think regionally, doesn't he?
Yeah, regionally. So, and he was coming back from London to go back to Australia. And when he heard that I might be going to London, he said, "What if you came out to Australia?" So it's sort of a weird roundabout turn of events. I got this offer to go and run Saatchi in Sydney.
So that's what was it an ECD that Saatchi's in London were offering you, or
no? It wasn't. And I mean, I realise now if I'd taken it, it would have been terrible. I think it was like creative director on something like Head and Shoulders.
Oh my God!
But when you come from when you're from South Africa, you have no idea.
Yeah.
So I see it happening.
Shampoo? What's that?
Yeah. But dandruff. But I see this happening a lot now, where they're getting a lot of guys going and working in these sort of regional or global roles. And they always last 6 months because it's a real set of skill where if you're a regional or global guy on a brand, it's a very different job to running an agency because you might not always have creative resource. You have to use other people's resource.
Yeah.
So I think I made the right move. I don't think I would have been very good at that job.
You're listening to Truth and Soul.
I've always been wary of hiring people on the basis of an award.
Sure.
There's been a number of cases in New Zealand of a multi-award-winning campaign which has 27 creatives down on it, and one of those 27 creatives comes to see you and goes, "Hey, I got a Grand Prix Cannes and for this," and like, well, are you brilliant, or were you part of? Yeah,
and I think that's maybe what I've the last couple of years here. The thing that I've really tried to do, and obviously I did it with Shane, Shane's moved to TBWA.
Shane Brannigan.
Yeah, is try to create some consistency where we've got a body of work each year that we're proud of. And the thing that I talk about is pride. It's not about, is it going to win at Cannes, or it's more like, are you proud of that piece of work?
Yeah.
And, if it wins, because I've had stuff in Cannes that I thought was a sure sitter and didn't win anything, and vice versa. We only enter a few shows. We've took that decision 5 years ago. Because at one point you could enter 26 shows. Yeah. Which we just thought was insane.
It is insane. I thought that the GFC would kill off some award shows, and instead it's multiplied them. I don't understand how it happened.
And I think if you're winning a silver bear in Tajikistan, or whatever,
I got 7 of those.
You're ahead of me.
Yeah.
But it's not. When does it stop having any value? And I think you've got to. If you win, you should really fucking celebrate it, and it should be amazing for the agency. But if you're getting, door stoppers every week, and they don't have, you can even see with press releases now, like there'll be some announcement about shit, and there's just nothing. No, it's like there's award fatigue.
We at when we set up Barnes Camp and Friends, we used to put the odd piece into award shows. Like one or two pieces into one or two shows. And I remember we did Pizza Roulette, which was where they had the ghost chili on one slice of pizza, but you didn't know which one, and it hugely successful. People, like students, loved the idea of having something really unpleasant to eat and needing to drink a litre of milk. So we're quite proud of it. Did a great job for Hell, and we put it into award in Australia, and it won a silver. Mm-hmm. Now, in those days, award was pretty tricky. It's and to win a silver at an award for an independent agency in the second year or something was pretty good. Mm. But nobody gave a shit. Mm. Nobody cared. Mm. And it was, so why are we doing this? Why are we spending money? And even when we win, nobody cares. So we went,
I think the one I remember, did you do the rabbit fur billboard?
Yeah.
I remember that. I think the thing is, if you're going to do it, the question is why. And I think you've got to celebrate the creatives, you've got to celebrate the effort, but the award itself has to have meaning.
Yes.
If you start, just doing it because it's a mathematical thing.
Yeah.
And there are lots of examples of agencies over the last 10, 15 years that, would try and get 400 finalists. I think when creativity becomes maths, that's maybe not the way to go. And so the way I look at it is, and I've always said this is, an agency I've always admired is, say, Wyden and Kennedy, where they never have the most.
Yeah.
But the work that they do is something that you remember. It's iconic. Yeah. And I think that's, for me, what I try to push towards is, like, we do work that is iconic. If it wins, great. But it's work that you're proud of.
Yeah, I think that it's important that you do the best work that you can, and if it's good enough for other people to go, wow, that's fantastic, we're going to give it an award, that's great. It's when people enter awards for their own sake.
And look, it's very hard I would say, in terms of that, the industry, I don't know if anyone's got completely clean hands on that.
Early on in my career, you're scrambling around to get a name. So,
but I do think, I think it's actually, strangely enough, the industry's changed in terms of the kind of work. I think it's harder, to do stuff for, that kind of work, but I'm sure it still exists. But I think the great thing about New Zealand is, for me, I almost call it the last paradise of advertising, because you can make big brand work here, you can get access to the CEOs, you can move fairly quickly. You don't always have the scale of other markets, but you should certainly have the speed. So I think that's part of why New Zealand is so successful, is the access that people have.
No, I think you're right, Damon. But dare I say, in terms of budgets and big brands and getting to see the CEOs, it's easier for DDB. And Colenso.
Yeah, look,
than for smaller agencies.
That might be fair. I mean, I think it's interesting. Even in Sydney, being an independent agency, I think is really tough. Because I don't know if it's interesting. I'd love to almost know what the sort of country's view is on independent agencies, because it's sometimes maybe there's more safety in networks or things like that, or there's a perception.
But do you mean the industries or the clients?
Just generally, because I feel like when I was in Sydney, the only agency I can think of that was really successful as independent was the Monkeys. At that point, I mean, they've obviously sold now.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a proliferation of independent agencies. And it's just kind of, maybe it's just because they're really difficult to do. But it feels like, the markets like Australia and New Zealand, then maybe there should be more.
It's difficult. It's not easy. And there is a huge oversupply of agencies.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see what's happening now. with WPP. And there's definitely, I think, what did they have, 4 or 5 agencies here in Auckland?
Yeah, yes, yeah, and they're cutting that down.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, to be fair DDB is a big fish in maybe a small pond.
It is.
And I think being a small agency in a small market is tough, because it's not like there's 20 banks or 30 banks. There's 3 or 4. So I think that's fair. It's tricky.
The consistency of management of DDB, where Marty O'Halloran, who took over from Doug Fode just after I started there in about 2001. Yeah. Marty being a calming influence and a nice guy to so many people on the client side and on agency side. I think it's provided that agency a solid base from which.
Yeah. And I mean, what did I take? I'm trying to remember when I got here, 2014 maybe, 13, 14. I think there's some agencies have a DNA in them. It's quite a hard thing to explain, but somebody said to me once about White and Kennedy is when you walk in there, no one tells you what the rules are, but you know what they are.
Yeah.
I feel that way a little bit about DDB, is that there's been a succession of people that there's sort of ingrained ideas there, which is creativity is really important, but doing the right thing, and it's not gimmicky.
It's decent.
It's decent, and people like Marty, it's about building brands. It's big sort of platforms, and I think that creates a consistency of behavior.
Yeah,
where your suits and your creatives and everyone knows that that's sort of how we do things, and people come to us because we do things a certain way, and maybe it's not always super flash, but we will get as excited about something working and being successful for the client as it being creative.
Yes,
and I think that balance for me. I've worked in agencies where you haven't had that, and it's not great. It's not great.
I was really surprised. There was I think it was Marketing Magazine did a survey of clients, and they said, what is the most important facet that you look for in an agency? Number 1 was creativity. Number 2 was effectiveness. And I can't understand that, why effectiveness is not the first.
Also, should they be separate?
Well, to my mind, effectiveness, as Birnbach would say, creativity is the best tool that you have to ensure effectiveness. But there's a phrase that we've used in the agency ever since we started, probably, which is whatever works. If it's not creative, but it's doing whatever it's meant to do, well, great. I mean, if often you can use creativity to multiply that effect, which is even better. But if it's working, it's working.
In a perfect world, it should be both. In a perfect world, I think it's funny. I think sometimes when they say creativity, that there's almost a desperate need these days for distinctiveness.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, that's from Ehrenberg Bass.
Yeah, but I think because he talks about being a distinctive brand asset, and that's often it's often a visual thing, where how something looks. But I think a distinctive brand asset can also be an emotion or a feeling. The other thing I would say is I think the reason a distinctive brand asset is so important these days is it's almost become a navigation device. So I feel like for a while being brand building wasn't in vogue. It had sort of kind of fallen out of favor, but I feel like it's going to come back because what happens when your consumer experience is exactly the same as the next person? What happens when your app also orders you coffee just like the other guy? There has to come a point where you can distinguish yourself from others. And I think that's getting harder and harder these days. And we spend a lot of time having those kinds of conversations with clients. Like, how do you stand out? And part of that for me is what creates effectiveness. You know, I find these things quite connected in my head. I don't see them as sort of separate things. I agree. Sometimes it might just be, you know, make the toothpaste hole bigger.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
often it's actually just about creating. If I think of what we've done for Lotto's a good example of where we stuck with something. You know, Imagine has been a platform that we've had for 5 years now.
Which is your favourite Lotto ad?
Oh, that's a tricky one. In terms of doing something fresh or new, I actually think what we've just done in terms of turning the ad into a ticket or into a game, where, you know, we had people looking at that ad for 6.5 minutes trying to find the numbers inside it. But Armored Truck, the last one, I always just thought as a piece of film, and, you know, the writing and what it turned out to be was so close. Yeah, it was almost what was on the page became the ad.
It's interesting you say that, because as soon as I loved that ad, and as soon as I thought the direction was movie quality.
Yeah,
it didn't look like an ad. The dialogue and the way that characters work, it was so believable. It was excellent. And I immediately went, who did that? Tim Bullock. So I'm going, Tim Bullock has taken that script and done marvelous things with it. But from your point of view, it is.
Oh, so no,
what it was meant to be.
But make no mistake, I mean, we've used, like, so Steve Asen did the pirate ship ad, which I always thought was a great piece of film. But I think the idea was written, was exactly as. Actually, the one thing that was added was the control room. That wasn't there.
Yeah.
And the reason we put the control room in where the guy's talking to him is it's almost like you realize that there are other people in on the prank.
Yeah.
Because you could have written that ad without the control room, and you wouldn't even, at the end, wouldn't have known if it was real or not.
Yes.
So that, we put that in, which I think made quite a big difference.
Look at this. The tape recorder. It's running.
So, Damon, you had a good time in Australia?
It was a good learning curve. I mean, Saatchi, we doubled the size of the agency, doubled the billings.
Yeah.
You know, it's a hell of a learning curve to get to a new country and learn how everything works.
Yes.
So, you know, I made some good work there, but I think moving to New Zealand was a good move for me.
That's interesting. I think there's a few people who've gone the other way. So, myself.
That's not me.
It's a young assistant. We've had creative directors, including myself, going to Australia, not enjoying it, and not having a good time of it, and coming back. And I'm sure the Australians haven't said it to my face, but I'm sure there's a certain amount of glee. Yeah, fucking Kiwis come over here and.
Yeah, I think Sydney's tough. It's not an easy market, and but it's still, you know, I still learned things there, and I did a piece of work there that called Penny the Pirate, which did well, and it taught me how to do real grown-up stuff, grown-up meetings, how you started to do integrated campaigns in the modern world. You know, so. And I worked with some really great people. You know, there's a lot of them now that are working at Google, or, you know, they've gone all over the place. So, you know, you can always learn from those experiences.
So how did the move come across? How did you end up here?
I just decided I didn't want to. I think you can get to a point where you're fighting for average work.
Yeah.
And I don't think, you know, there's nobody to blame for that. You can just find yourself in that kind of space.
You just buy something. I don't care what it is, just buy something.
Well, you start having these weird things. Well, if they don't buy this, they might make something even worse.
Yeah.
And that's not a good place to be in. And I, you know, I'd moved my family 8,000 miles. You know, it's quite a stressful thing to move countries, or I found it stressful. And
it is. I mean, I find it takes about 6 months before you go, okay, this is.
Yeah.
I live here now. I'm not just a long stay tourist.
Yeah, I think it takes time to feel it. But I didn't really want to move again. But I'd always admired the work that came out of New Zealand. And I do think, and this is, Kiwis block your ears, but there is a strange affinity or connection between the way South Africans are and New Zealanders are. I don't know if it's because it's a small country at the edge of the world, the tyranny of distance, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But there's a mentality where people here go, oh, we'll give it a go, or we'll try it. And I also think why New Zealand does well is it's not really that focused on anyone else. They're aware of it, but there are other markets that are completely obsessed with what America's doing or what London's doing. I find that there's a bit more of a, well, this is something we thought of and built in the garage, and we quite like it. And I think South Africa has that as well. There's there's all sorts of problems in South Africa, but that gives amazing solutions to things as well. So I don't know, I felt maybe a connection there somehow.
And you're a big rugby fan, which maybe helped?
Yeah, well, I've now lived in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, so my bases are covered.
Are you going to Japan at all for the World Cup?
No, I'd love to, but I'd have to.
Okay, I have a spare ticket for the quarter final.
I love the way you set that up, mate. Yeah, so.
Your blog, which I think is called Damon's Brain.
Yeah, it's not the world's greatest title, but I started writing it as a form of therapy. Oh, here comes,
brilliant, come in. Thank you.
Here comes the coffee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I was starting to flag.
Can you get it?
Quick burst of caffeine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Damon's Brain, your blog.
Yeah. So,
is it true you have 150,000?
Yeah, there's now been. I can actually look at my phone.
That should get you a Ken Grand Prix, I think.
It's. It's over a couple of years that's built up. I mean, I've been writing it now for 5 years.
Yeah.
Let me see I'll tell you what it is. It's in here somewhere.
We're just trying to ensure accuracy, listeners.
146,800.
So that is visitors. That's total number of visitors.
Yeah.
So not unique visitors.
Dare
I say?
Unique is about 92,000. So it's. I mean, the reason I started writing it wasn't because I wanted lots of people to read it. I just felt like no one was. There's sort of a lot of guys, with Venn diagrams and cool trainers that do. They always sort of, talk about creativity being too important to be left to the creatives. There's a little bit of.
Yeah, you're talking about the planners here, Damon.
Let's call it the explaining class.
Yeah. Okay.
So they explain creativity. And I thought, well, it would be good if somebody who actually has to make stuff to try and talk about it and at least have a point of view on it, because I just didn't ever see anyone talking for the creatives. It was sort of an absence. So I started writing, and I was writing for myself as much as anyone else. It's sort of like you're doing this and you say, well, let's see how this goes. Kind of, I'm writing a blog because I've heard people write blogs.
Yeah.
And there was sort of in the beginning, I probably had 3 people read it or something. And then there was one that I wrote, and I started getting people emailing me from other parts of the world, asking me like what they should do with their careers. People from Minneapolis going, I feel like that too. Like, should I do this? And I was like, geez, I don't know how to answer that. But I realized there was really there are a lot of creatives that are probably working in what I call depot agencies. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of agencies across the world where you may be just resizing stuff, or there wasn't a lot of love for creativity in some of those places, and I got a lot of quite heart-wrenching letters from people or emails saying like, "Fuck, I don't know what to do with my life," kind of thing. Yeah. So I kept writing, and
you got mine then.
Yeah, I got yours. Oh, you're that Paul.
Yeah.
And I just kept writing. I kept writing, and it almost became a discipline for me. So now I do it every 2 weeks. sometimes I don't write because I've got nothing to say.
Yeah.
And I think I've made that mistake where I've written stuff just because I had to. And that I don't do that anymore. And then, people have picked it up, and it's free. Anyone wants to put it up, if it helps them. A lot of people use it for the internal newsletters. It gets published in South Africa and Australia and Asia. I just do it because I don't know. Sometimes it's a lonely business being a creative, and maybe it helps someone, and that's why I do it. Yeah,
I think you do use Twitter.
I do, but it's sort of I have a strange relationship with Twitter. I do use it, but it almost always seems to be like a secondary thing for me. I've always put it up. It seems like LinkedIn is where, I don't know what I think of LinkedIn, but it's always seems to be a lot of people active on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think that's because they feel justified in reading LinkedIn at work. Right?
Business Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I'm going to probably, I'm copying Paul. I'm going to probably do a book.
But is yours going to be a satire on the world of advertising?
No,
please don't.
No, it's not. It's not. I think it's going to be. Years ago, I did a shoot, and the client ate their own pack shot by mistake, which cost about 60 grand to fix. So I'm thinking of calling my book "Eating the Pack Shot," because it always represents to me the strangeness of advertising. You can have everything planned and figured out, and then your own client eats their own chocolate bar, and you have to start again. So it's probably lessons or things that if I'm perfectly honest, it's a vanity project.
Yeah,
I'm doing it because I've just always wanted to do one, and if anyone reads it, that's great.
But you're going to take. I mean, you could take your articles from Damon's brain and publish them as a.
Yeah, that's part of it. It's like I think there's it's kind of maybe looking at creativity and what I've taken out, or the lessons I've taken out of 25 years of doing this, and what are the reoccurring themes that I see over and over, and so it would probably be, maybe it's a creative self-help book. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah, well, my title for my version of that is how to be quite good at advertising, because we get masterclasses from how to be how to kind of
be a little bit
along.
Good. So we'll see.
The fight for mediocrity is up there. Yeah, well, I thought this was amazing. That there was an article. This was a few years ago.
Yeah,
there was an article about one of the players for the New Zealand Warriors, the rugby league team, and they're asking questions, and they said, I can't remember his name. They said, "Do you read? Do you read books?" And he went, "I don't read very very many books, but I'm reading one at the moment, which is just fantastic and is helping me in my career." It's called. It was Paul Arden's book.
Oh yeah.
It was.
It's not how good you are, how good you want to be.
Yeah, I just thought. Here's a book by an advertising creative director, and it's aimed at advertising people, and a rugby league player. It's the only book he's read, and he's loving it.
Well, one of the things I always do is I always write for the creatives when I put stuff out, and then I have all these people come to me and say, "Well, why do you always say for the creatives? I'm not a creative." And I said, "Well, that's a decision you've made." And that's why I do it, because I think it's funny how in our business right now, everyone talks about creativity and how important it is, how vital it is. But it's sort of just become, I think Susan Sontag has a thing, which is, a word is not a thing. It's one of my favorite quotes. A word is not a thing. And it's funny how when people use language to just talk about creativity, they don't really always explore what it is or what it means. And I think for me, that's, these kinds of books are much more useful beyond advertising. I think creativity is a much bigger space than that. But I think it's just become a word. And I think we need to actually investigate what creativity is a bit more than just sort of putting it on a shelf.
Yes, it gets bumbled around and used and applied to things that are not really
Yeah.
creative.
Or, we'll use the word innovation because it sounds better. You know, innovation, content. I've got lots of words I can talk to you about.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
another time.
We'll save that for another one because entrepreneur is another area that I find a little bit suspect sometimes. Damon, I know you have to go and do some creative directing with Uncle Marty.
Yeah.
Or shepherding.
Yeah.
So
when you send this out, send this to Marty and say I spent the whole day doing this with you.
Okay. Yeah. It's been. It's now 3:30.
You're listening to Truth and Soul.
Biggest mistake. I like. I find it interesting to hear the struggles that people have had. You do a good ad, it's brilliant, and you win a million awards. Yep, okay, but what was the, what in your career just stands out? You go, geez, that fucked up there.
Yeah, well, that's a hard. I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes, but I think maybe. I think when you get into this business, you can be, impressed. When I started in this business, when I began, I always thought everybody knew a lot more than me.
Yeah.
You meet all these guys and they got the jargon, they've got, the rimless glasses, they've got it all figured out. So I think I spent
about Modo.
Modo doesn't have rimless glasses and his hair is not as good as mine. But, but I think, even creatives, you meet creatives that are very slick sometimes and have got the patois all figured out. I think for me, so the first half of my career was learning that no one really knows anything. And I think William Goldman actually said that once about filmmaking or Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I really think what I've had to learn is to celebrate people that give it a go and make stuff. Because, I think we think about creativity these days as an answer. But, oil painting's never dry. It's a process. My favorite quote is Paul Klee, which is, a line is a dot that went for a walk. And I've always loved that because I think that explains how you get to great ideas. It's not a single moment. It's a series of moments. So the thing that I've had to learn to trust is people that try or give it a go. I'm very wary of people that tell me they know the answer right off the bat. And I think that was a mistake I made early in my career. I think as you get older, the mistake you can make is the mistake of wisdom, thinking you know the answer.
Well, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
So I think it's, my career, the first half is maybe being too naive. And then maybe as you get older, you think you know too much. And I think I love being surprised. Maybe I like to be proved wrong. It's something, that's something I've, maybe as I've got older, I've made a mistake where you think you know the shortcut or you know the answer. But, the biggest mistake you can make is to move away from creativity or ideas. There's a lot of people right now that are peddling all sorts of other answers. And I think, we should really double down on creativity. I think it's not it's dangerous to just think it's easy to replace it with something else.
So you mean, because of the targeting, you can get a fisherman with 2 dogs who lives in a beach house in Tafanui.
That's part of it.
And everyone forgets the message that you give to that person, whoever it is, needs to work as well.
Well, I always say that people are obsessed with picture frames rather than the picture, and that's the one way I explain it. Or there's a great line from The Economist. I actually said this to a client yesterday, which was, "Would you sit next to you at a dinner party?" And what that means to me is you can be in exactly the right place, but that doesn't mean anyone's going to pay any attention to you.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of belief that just by being somewhere, people are going to go, "Oh, thank God you're here." I think you have to always think when it comes to people's time, you have to offer them something. And you have to offer them something that is emotional. It can't just be information, because they can get that anyway.
But they said about advertising in the UK, there was a contract between the listener, between the viewer, generally television advertising, and the advertiser. And that was, we're going to give you an interesting 30, 60 seconds, and you'll go, oh yeah, that was quite fun. And at the end of it, we'll show you what a product.
And I'll go, okay, I'll go along with that. Yeah.
And that happened for a long time in the UK, to such an extent that there were surveys where people said they preferred the ads to the programmes.
Well, I always remember, is it Hamlet Cigars?
Hamlet Cigars, yeah.
You know, I remember that's one of the first things, and I always just remember thinking, it's just great. And, you know, I didn't care what it was for. It was just, I just liked the way it was made, and, you know, it was just funny. And, you know, it's funny, like, there's a whole assault at the moment on the concept of an ad.
Yeah.
We have in this industry.
What, that looks like an ad?
Yeah. So, you know, the art of seduction, the art of, I'll tell you a joke, you give me your time.
Yeah.
So what you tend to find now is a lot of people are trying to do things that are real or authentic. And I don't think that's a long road. There's a lot of brands, you know, where you have to just accept that you're funny, or you're, you know, I'm going to tell you a gag. Like, I don't think every brand can be about purpose, you know, or have these strong views on the world. I think some brands can, but other brands could just be fun.
Yeah, I again, that's a long subject. I think purpose, because I'm not convinced by it, that you see some absurd stats. Because you say, if you interview people and you go, does the milk that you drink, does it matter to you that the brand that you get produces milk ethically? And they'll go, yes. And you'll come out with that stat. But in the supermarket, they'll buy whatever's cheapest.
Yeah. And I mean, so it's, I think, there's a whole conversation about this that we should have one day. But I think you might find there's a course correction where, you know, we might have to just make things that people like. I think Dave Trott's just written a blog, which is advertising isn't medicine. You know, it's just like, just make me laugh, or just, you know. And I think, I mean, he's one of the best for me in terms of the way he looks at it. And I think we must be careful of what we think advertising can and can't do.
Yes. And on that note, leaving an open question, and maybe if we can find time to do this again and to delve into other subjects, we can have beer or coffee. But Damon Stapleton, thank you very much.
Thank you,
for
sir.
Coming and having a chat.
It was an honour.
You've been listening to Truth
and Soul,
the New Zealand Advertising Podcast.
Okay, a list of credits. Thank you very much to this week's guests, whoever he, she, or it might be. Damon Stapleton in this case. If you liked it, drop us a line, paul@truthandsoul.co.nz. Thank you very much to everyone at Franklin Road, Jonathan, Cole, the Wastrel, Shane, Vanessa and Gracie, Otis, who did the logo, and Matt Stalker, who's going to play us out. Thank you.
On the farewell drive, we found 100 ways that our hands fit together. Centrifugal force pulls us apart as we spin. Please forgive my trembling hands, crudely silhouetted by the flickering spires of candlelight, while the wicked sleep sound The anxious toss and turn, thoughts come not as single spies, but in battalions, while the wicked sleep sound. The anxious toss and turn. And it's at times like these that we understand our Father's fascination with dendrology. The family tree is losing its leaves. Please forgive my trembling hands, crudely silhouetted by the flickering spires of candlelight, while the wicked sleep sound. The anxious toss and turn, thoughts come not as single spies, but in battalions, while the wicked sleep sound. The anxious toss and turn.